A uniform is supposed to represent justice, a badge, a symbol of protection. But on one freezing night in the nation's capital for 2 police officers, they became tools of torment. Their target was a nameless, shivering figure huddled in an alleyway, a man they saw as less than human. They mocked him, shoved him, and threatened him, enjoying the power they held over society's most vulnerable. But they made one catastrophic mistake. They didn't realize their victim wasn't just another forgotten soul. He was a man who not only understood the law, but who helped write it, and the ID in his pocket was about to bring their entire world crashing down. The December air in Washington, D.C. had teeth. It was a gnawing, invasive cold that seeped through layers of clothing and settled deep into the bones. For the man huddled in the recessed doorway of a closed bookstore just off DuPont Circle, the cold was a feature, not a bug. It was a reminder of the raw, unfiltered reality he sought on nights like these. He wore a threadbare U.S. Army field jacket, its green faded to a mossy gray, and a navy blue watch cap pulled low over his salt and pepper hair. His face, etched with the fine lines of a man in his late 60s, was partially obscured by a week's worth of wiry grey stubble. To any passerby, he was just another piece of the city's unfortunate human scenery, a homeless man bracing against the inevitable drop in temperature. This was precisely the illusion Justice Theodore Monroe intended to create. For the past 5 years, ever since his wife Eleanor had passed, Theo had undertaken these solitary nocturnal pilgrimages. 4 times a year, once per season, he would shed the august robes of a Supreme Court justice, along with the tailored suits, the polished shoes, and the impenetrable aura of authority that came with the title. He would don the clothes of the forgotten, the invisible, and walk the streets of the city whose laws he helped interpret. Eleanor had been the one who understood the ground truth. A lifelong social worker, she had spent her career in the trenches of human struggle. "You can't see the whole picture from the bench, Theo," she used to tell him, her voice a gentle chide. "The law isn't just abstract theory. It has a weight. It lands on real people. You need to feel that weight." He hadn't truly understood until she was gone. Now these nights were his penance, his tribute, and his most vital form of judicial research. He never spoke to anyone, never begged, never interfered. He just watched and listened and felt. He observed the casual cruelty and the unexpected kindness. He saw how the city's ordinances, the ones debated in climate-controlled rooms, played out under the harsh glare of streetlights. He learned more about the Fourth Amendment from watching a tense police stop than he ever could from a legal brief. Tonight the wind was particularly vicious, funneling between the brick-faced buildings. A patrol car from the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department cruised past, slowed, and then kept going. Theo didn't flinch. He remained perfectly still, a statue of destitution. He had a small, battered tin cup on the ground beside him, a prop he'd found on his first outing. Tonight, it held only a few dead leaves skittering in the wind. His thoughts were on an upcoming case, a complex appeal involving qualified immunity. The arguments had been presented with sterile academic precision by lawyers in $4,000 suits. They had spoken of legal precedents and procedural standards of Graham versus Connor and the objectively reasonable officer. But out here, those concepts shed their academic skin and became about fear, power, and the split-second decisions that could shatter a life. Another hour passed. The last of the late-night diners and bar hoppers had vanished, leaving the streets to the night crawlers and the city workers. A street sweeper hummed in the distance, its rhythmic swoosh-swoosh, a lonely lullaby. Theo pulled the thin jacket tighter, the cold a familiar ache in his joints. He was considering calling it a night when the world's quiet was torn apart by the squeal of tires. The same patrol car he had seen earlier had whipped a U-turn, and now sat idling directly in front of his alcove, its headlights pinning him in their blinding glare. The beams were so bright they erased the world around him, making him feel like a specimen under a microscope. Theo didn't move. He kept his eyes downcast, his posture unchanged. This was part of the experience. He was no longer Justice Monroe. He was a nobody, and a nobody did not challenge the light. The driver's side door opened with a groan. A pair of heavy, polished black boots hit the pavement, followed by the hulking frame of an officer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick neck that strained against his collar. The second door opened, and a younger, leaner officer emerged, his movements more hesitant. "Well, well, well, Carter!" The first officer boomed his voice, carrying an unpleasant mix of boredom and arrogance. "Look what we've got here. A genuine piece of DC history." The officer whose name tag read Riley sauntered over his hand, resting casually on the butt of his holstered sidearm. He stopped a few feet from Theo, looking down his nose with a palpable sneer. "Got a name, old-timer?" Riley asked, though the question held no genuine curiosity. It was a demand, a tool to establish dominance. Theo remained silent for a long moment. His protocol on these nights was to be a ghost, but being addressed directly changed the rules. He lifted his head slowly, his eyes clear and startlingly intelligent, meeting the officer's gaze. In a low, slightly raspy voice, he said, "I'm just trying to stay warm." Riley chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. "Not an answer to my question. See, when a police officer asks you a question, you answer it. That's how this works. Let's try again. What's your name?" His partner, Carter, shifted his weight uneasily. "Keegan, maybe we just let him be. He's not bothering anyone." "He's bothering me, Carter," Riley snapped back without taking his eyes off Theo. "He's an eyesore. Bad for the neighborhood. This is DuPont, not some back alley kennel." He turned his attention back to Theo. "You deaf I asked for your name." Theo held his gaze. He had faced down the sharpest legal minds in the country. He had been questioned, challenged and cross-examined by senators and presidents. The casual intimidation of a beat cop was on a tactical level unimpressive, but on a human level it was profoundly chilling. This was the raw, unchecked power he came out here to understand. "I'd rather not say," Theo replied, his voice even and calm. Riley's smirk widened into a predatory grin. "Oh, you'd rather not? You think you have a choice?" He took another step forward, his shadow engulfing Theo completely. "I think you're looking for a warm place to spend the night. A nice, cozy cell. We can arrange that. All we need is a reason. Failure to identify yourself is a very good reason." He nudged the tin cup with the toe of his boot, sending the dead leaves scattering across the pavement. "What's wrong, cat? Got your tongue, or are you just stupid?" And in that moment, Justice Theodore Monroe knew this particular night of observation was about to become something else entirely. The insult hung in the frigid air, sharp and ugly. Theo felt a familiar cold anger coil in his gut, but he mastered it instantly. Anger was a luxury he couldn't afford on the bench, and it was a liability out here. He had to see this through to understand the anatomy of this kind of abuse. Officer Carter took a hesitant step forward. "Riley, come on, let's just go. We've got bigger things to worry about." "Negative, Carter," Riley said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. He seemed to be enjoying this performing for his rookie partner. "This is what they call proactive policing. Community engagement. We're engaging with our community." He crouched down, bringing his face uncomfortably close to Theo's. The smell of stale coffee and artificial cinnamon from his gum was overpowering. "Let's get a good look at you," Riley said, his eyes scanning Theo's face with theatrical disgust. "Yep, just as I thought. Nothing. No spark in there at all, just another drain on the system." Theo met his gaze without blinking. He had seen this look before. It was the look of a man who equated his badge with superiority, who saw the world not as a community to protect, but as a kingdom to rule. The uniform didn't serve the law. It served his ego. "Officer," Theo said, his voice maintaining its unnerving calm, "I am not breaking any laws by sitting here. I am on public property, and I am not disturbing the peace." The articulate, grammatically perfect sentence seemed to enrage Riley more than any curse could have. It was a disruption of the narrative he was constructing. Homeless men were supposed to be incoherent, addled, or subservient. This one sounded like a college professor. "Oh, a lawyer, are we?" Riley sneered, straightening up. "Got a problem with vagrancy laws, counselor. You can take it up with the city, but right now, you're a public nuisance, and I'm telling you to move along." "And where would you have me go?" Theo asked the simple question, a direct challenge to the officer's lazy command. "I don't care," Riley spat. "Go to a shelter. Go to Virginia. Go jump in the Potomac. Just get out of my sight. You have 1 minute to collect your things," he said, gesturing disdainfully at the empty ground around Theo, "and disappear." Theo did not move. He was testing the boundary now. He wanted to know how far a man like Riley would go when his authority was met not with aggression, but with quiet, immovable dignity. The minute ticked by in charged silence. The distant hum of the city was the only sound. Carter looked from his partner to Theo, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. He knew this was wrong. He had been on the force for less than a year, but his father, a retired detective, had drilled into him the difference between a police officer and a bully. Riley was crossing that line with a swagger. Riley checked his watch with a dramatic flourish. "Time's up." He reached down and grabbed the collar of Theo's army jacket, yanking him forward. The motion was rough, violent, and utterly unnecessary. Theo, caught off guard by the sudden physicality, stumbled forward onto his hands and knees. The rough concrete scraped his palms. "Get up," Riley barked. "I told you to move." "That's enough, Keegan," Carter said, his voice finally finding a spine. "You're going to hurt him." "He's resisting." Riley shot back, his voice tight with adrenaline. It was the classic catch-all justification. He failed to obey a lawful order. Theo pushed himself up slowly, his joints protesting. He brushed the grit from his hands. There was a small bleeding scrape on his left palm. He looked at it for a moment, then back at Riley. The analytical part of his brain was cataloguing everything: the unlawful order, the use of excessive force, the failure to de-escalate. He was no longer just an observer. He was a victim of an assault. "Officer," Theo said, his voice now devoid of any warmth, as cold and hard as the pavement. "You just assaulted me. There was no probable cause for your order, and your use of force was unwarranted." Riley laughed out loud, a barking, incredulous sound. "Oh, this is rich. This bum is going to lecture me on probable cause. You think anyone is going to believe you? It's your word against 2 sworn officers of the law. Now get out of here before I decide to arrest you for assault on a police officer. I'm sure I can find a witness who saw you take a swing at me." He was looking directly at Carter when he said it. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. Carter's face went pale. He was being told to corroborate a lie, to become an accessory to his partner's thuggery. This was the critical moment, the point of no return. Theo knew that men like Riley didn't back down. They doubled down. They built a fortress of lies around their actions and dared anyone to breach it. He had seen the tragic results of this behavior. in the case files that crossed his desk, lives ruined, communities broken, and trust in the system shattered. He had felt the weight of the law from the bench. Now he was feeling its absence on the street. "You're right," Theo said quietly. "It would be my word against yours." He straightened his jacket and slowly, deliberately reached into the inside pocket of his worn coat. Instantly, the atmosphere shifted. "Hands up, show me your hands!" Riley yelled, his hand flying to his sidearm, unsnapping the holster. Carter, his training kicking in, also drew his weapon, pointing it at Theo with trembling hands. "Don't move. Show us your hands. Slowly." The quiet alley was suddenly electric with the threat of lethal force. Theo ignored the commands. His movements remained unhurried, almost serene. He was not reaching for a weapon, but for something far more powerful. He was reaching for the truth. The world seemed to shrink to the space between the three men, a triangle of fear, arrogance, and cold, calculating calm. The barrels of 2 Glock pistols were trained on Theo's chest. The officer's shouts echoed off the brick walls, sharp and frantic. "I said, show me your hands!" Riley screamed, his voice cracking with a mix of adrenaline and fury. Theo's hand emerged from his coat. It was not holding a weapon. It was holding a plain, well-worn, brown leather wallet. It was the kind of wallet a grandfather might carry, softened with age, its corners rounded from years of use. For a split second, the sight was so incongruous, so mundane, that it stunned the officers into silence. Theo's movements remained deliberate. He didn't toss the wallet or hold it up in surrender. With his other hand, he slowly opened it. His gaze never left Riley's face. His eyes were like chips of granite, ancient and unyielding. He used his thumb to slide a single card from its sleeve. It wasn't a driver's license or a state-issued ID. It was a simple, elegant card, off-white, with crisp black lettering and a gold-embossed seal. The design was understated, yet it radiated an authority that dwarfed the guns pointed at him. He held the card out. "Take it, Officer Carter." Theo said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension. He addressed the younger officer by name, a calculated move that isolated Riley. Carter, his pistol still raised, but his focus shattered, hesitated. "What is that, some kind of fake FBI badge?" Riley sneered, though his bravado now had a hollow, brittle quality. He was confused. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. "Carter," Theo repeated, his voice firm. "Look at the ID." Slowly, as if in a trance, Carter lowered his weapon and took a few cautious steps forward. He reached out with a trembling hand and took the card. He glanced down at it. His eyes scanned the first line, then the second, then the third. The color drained from his face. He went from pale to ghostly white in an instant. His jaw went slack and the hand holding the card began to shake uncontrollably. He looked up at Theo, his eyes wide, with a dawning horror, so profound it was almost comical. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "What is it?" Riley demanded, growing impatient. "What's it say?" Carter couldn't speak. He could only stare at the old man in the tattered jacket, who now seemed to be growing in stature, his quiet dignity transforming into something monumental. Frustrated, Riley snatched the card from his partner's hand. He held it up to the harsh glare of the headlights. He squinted his lips, moving silently, as he read the text. "Supreme Court of the United States, Theodore W. Monroe, Associate Justice." The world stopped. The distant city hummed the wind, the pounding in Riley's own ears. It all faded into a deafening silence. The name was instantly recognizable. Justice Monroe, the swing vote, the one they called the Scholar. The man whose picture was in newspapers and on television screens, a face Riley had seen a dozen times, but had never truly registered. A face that was now impossibly staring at him, from a worn piece of government identification, and from the shadows of a homeless man's watch cap. Riley's mind refused to process it. It had to be a fake, a high-quality, elaborate prank. But then he looked from the photo on the ID, a picture of a clean-shaven, smiling man in a suit, to the face of the man standing before him. The bone structure was the same. The eyes, those sharp, intelligent, piercing eyes, were identical. The sneer on Officer Keegan Riley's face dissolved, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated terror. The blood drained from his face, leaving a sickly, blotchy pallor. The hand holding the ID trembled, and the card slipped from his numb fingers, fluttering to the pavement. Theo didn't break his gaze. He watched the carefully constructed edifice of Riley's arrogance crumble into dust. He had seen a similar look on the faces of powerful attorneys whose arguments had just been systematically dismantled during oral arguments. It was the look of a man who had not only lost, but had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered that he was only just beginning to comprehend the scale of his own destruction. "Officer Riley." Theo said, his voice quiet, but carrying the immense weight of his office. "Your badge number is 7241. Officer Carter, yours is 8956. Both of you holstered your weapons at approximately 1:47 a.m. You initiated contact with me at 1:32 a.m. without probable cause. At 1:45 a.m., you, Officer Riley, committed battery when you forcibly pushed me to the ground." He recited the facts with the dispassionate precision of a court stenographer. Each statement was a nail being hammered into the coffin of their careers. "I believe," he continued, his voice dropping even lower, "that your body-worn cameras have been active throughout this entire interaction. Is that correct?" Carter nodded dumbly, unable to form words. Riley looked as if he was going to be sick. "The body cam. The irrefutable high-definition audio and video record of his every sneer, his every insult, his every illegal action." Theo bent down slowly with the stiffness of an old man and picked up his identification from the ground. He wiped it carefully on his sleeve before tucking it back into his wallet. When he straightened up, he looked directly at Riley, his eyes holding no anger, no triumph, only a profound and weary disappointment. "Officer Riley," he said, "get your supervisor on the radio. Get him here, now." The command, delivered with the quiet finality of a gavel strike, shattered the paralysis that had gripped the two officers. Carter fumbled for the radio on his shoulder, his hands shaking so badly it took him 3 tries to key the microphone. Riley remained frozen, a statue of dread, his mind replaying the last 20 minutes in a horrifying high-speed loop. Every smug word, every shove was now evidence. "Dispatch, this is 3 David 4. Carter stammered, his voice a choked whisper. "Requesting a supervisor at our location. DuPont North Side Alley by the old Kramer's building." The dispatcher's voice, tinny and impersonal, crackled back. 3 David 4, is the scene secure? What's the nature of the request?" Carter looked at Theo, then at Riley, his eyes pleading for guidance. Riley was useless, lost in his own personal abyss. Theo gave a slight nod. The scene is secure," Carter managed. It's a sensitive situation. Just please send a sergeant. Now." The 10 minutes it took for the supervisor's car to arrive felt like 10 years. The silence was thick and suffocating. Carter stood rigidly, his gaze fixed on the middle distance, avoiding looking at either Theo or his partner. Riley, meanwhile, seemed to be physically shrinking. His broad shoulders slumped. His face, usually ruddy and confident, was now ashen and slick with a cold sweat. He kept opening his mouth as if to say something, an apology, a denial, an excuse, but the words wouldn't come. What could he possibly say? Finally, a fresh set of headlights cut through the darkness. A different patrol car, this one, with sergeant's stripes on its side, pulled up behind the first. A woman emerged from the driver's seat. Sergeant Eva Rostova was a 20-year veteran of the force, a compact, no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes, and a reputation for being tough but fair. She saw her two officers, one looking terrified, and the other looking like a ghost, and a third figure, a man who looked homeless, standing calmly in a doorway. Her cop senses immediately told her this was no routine call. "Riley Carter, what the hell is going on?" she demanded, as she approached, her voice sharp. "Dispatch said it was sensitive. What does that mean?" Riley flinched at the sound of his name. It was Carter who spoke, his voice barely audible. "Sarge, there's been an incident." Rostova's eyes narrowed. She looked from Carter's pale face to Riley's vacant stare. Then she looked at Theo. "An incident with him?" she asked, her tone laced with skepticism. "Did he assault you?" "No, Sergeant," a new voice cut in. It was Theo. He stepped out of the shadows and into the dim light. "The assault was the other way around." Rostova's gaze snapped to him. She took in the worn clothes, the grizzled face. Her expression was one of professional weariness. She'd dealt with hundreds of complaints from street people over the years, most of them rambling and incoherent. "And who are you?" she asked, her hand moving instinctively toward her belt. Theo didn't answer. He simply held out the leather wallet and once again produced the ID card. He offered it to her. "I believe this will answer your question." Rostova took the card, a flicker of annoyance on her face. She pulled a small flashlight from her belt and shone it on the ID. The beam illuminated the golden seal. She read the name. Her professional mask vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. She looked from the card to Theo's face, her flashlight beam tracing his features. Her jaw tightened. "Oh my God!" She breathed the words coming out as a soft puff of vapor in the cold air. She immediately switched off her flashlight and handed the ID back with a reverence that bordered on fear. "Mr. Justice Monroe, I am so sorry, sir. I had no idea." She turned on her officers, her face a mask of cold fury. The weary supervisor was gone, replaced by an avenging angel. "What did you do?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. Riley finally found his voice, a pathetic, stammering squeak. "Sarge, it was a misunderstanding. We were telling him to move along. He was being uncooperative. He shoved him." "Sarge." Carter blurted out the truth, spilling out of him in a desperate rush. "Riley shoved him to the ground, for no reason. We had no reason to even talk to him. It was all Riley." "Shut up, Carter." Riley snarled, a flash of his old self returning. "No, you shut up, Riley." Rostova snapped, stepping directly into his personal space. "Both of you turn around. Put your hands on the vehicle. Now." Stunned, the two officers complied, assuming the position of the suspects they so often dealt with. Rostova didn't arrest them. Instead, she personally removed their sidearms from their holsters. She checked the chambers, secured them, and placed them on the hood of her car. It was a gesture of profound humiliation and a clear signal you are no longer trusted with this authority. She turned back to Theo, her expression a mixture of profound apology and professional efficiency. "Sir, I cannot express how sorry I am for the conduct of my officers. This is unacceptable. It is a disgrace to this department." "Your apology is noted, Sergeant," Theo said, his tone still level. "But it is not your apology to give. It is the actions of your officers that require scrutiny. I want a full and transparent investigation into this incident. I want the body camera footage from both officers preserved immediately without alteration." "Of course, sir. Absolutely," Rostova said, already pulling out her phone. "I'm calling the captain and the head of the Internal Affairs Division directly." They'll be here within the hour." As Sergeant Rostova walked away to make the calls, her back ramrod straight. Theo looked at the two men standing by the car. Carter was staring at the ground, tears of shame and fear tracing paths through the grime on his face. Riley was just broken. The bully stripped of his power, and his weapons was nothing more than a scared man facing the ruin of his life. Theo felt no satisfaction, no pleasure in their downfall. He only felt a deep, abiding sorrow. The system he had dedicated his life to upholding was meant to prevent nights like this. And yet here they were. He knew this incident wasn't just about two bad cops. It was about a culture that allowed men like Riley to flourish, and a system that intimidated men like Carter into silence. And as the first sirens of the arriving top brass began to wail in the distance, Justice Monroe knew that the real work was just beginning. The arrival of Captain Miller, the precinct commander, and two grim-faced detectives from the Internal Affairs Division IAD transformed the grimy alley into a formal crime scene. The area was cordoned off with yellow tape. Under the pulsing blue and red lights, the scene looked surreal. Miller, a man whose political instincts were as sharp as his uniform's creases, approached Theo with a face carved from mortification. "Justice Monroe, on behalf of the entire Metropolitan Police Department, I offer you our deepest, most sincere apology." He began, his voice oozing practiced contrition. Theo cut him off, not unkindly. "Captain, I appreciate the sentiment, but apologies won't fix the systemic issues that led to this moment. What I require is assurance that this will be investigated with the utmost integrity." "You have my word, sir," Miller said quickly. "Detective Harding," he said, gesturing to the senior IAD detective, "will be leading the investigation. The officer's body cam footage has already been flagged and uploaded to a secure server. Chain of custody will be impeccable." Detective Harding, a tall, somber man with eyes that had seen every form of human failing, stepped forward. "Sir, we will need to take a formal statement from you. We can do that here, or we can escort you somewhere more comfortable." "We'll do it here," Theo said. "I want to describe the events as they happened, where they happened." For the next hour, standing in the cold, Theo recounted the night's events with photographic clarity. He omitted no detail, from the condescending tone in Riley's voice to Carter's visible discomfort to the precise way he was shoved to the ground. He spoke not with the emotion of a victim, but with the dispassionate precision of a justice dictating an opinion. Harding and his partner took meticulous notes, their professional expressions betraying nothing. Meanwhile, Riley and Carter were separated and placed in the back of different patrol cars, their careers effectively over. The process was cold and clinical. They were now on the other side of the system they had once represented. By 4 a.m., Theo was finally escorted home in an unmarked car, driven by Detective Harding himself. The dilapidated army jacket had been taken as evidence. He sat in the passenger seat in his thin shirt, the car's heater blasting, watching the silent, sleeping monuments of Washington, D.C. slide by. The next morning, the storm broke. Captain Miller had tried to keep a lid on it, but a situation involving a Supreme Court justice being assaulted by police was too explosive to contain. Someone leaked it. By 9 a.m., every major news outlet in the country was leading with the story. The headlines were sensational. SCOTUS justice assaulted while disguised as homeless man. Police brutality reaches nation's highest court. The MPD was thrown into a crisis of unprecedented scale. The chief of police called an emergency press conference, his face a mask of grim determination. He announced that 2 officers had been suspended without pay, pending a full investigation. He promised transparency and accountability, but the damage was done. The story was a perfect, horrifying storm of race-class power and police misconduct. In his chambers at the Supreme Court, Theo watched the news reports with a heavy heart. His fellow justices had reached out, expressing shock and concern. The Chief Justice had called him personally, offering any support he needed. But Theo felt a strange sense of detachment from the Führer. The media was focusing on him, the celebrity victim. But he knew the real story was about all the people who endure the same treatment without a powerful ID in their pocket. The centerpiece of the investigation was the body cam footage. In the sterile viewing room at IAD headquarters, Harding Miller and a city attorney watched the videos. It was even more damning than they had feared. Riley's camera showed his aggressive, swaggering approach, his face contorted in a smug sneer as he taunted Theo. The audio was crystal clear, capturing every insult, every threat. The shove was jarring and undeniably malicious. Carter's footage was perhaps even more revealing. It showed his perspective, Riley's escalating aggression, his own hesitant attempts to intervene, and the raw fear and shock on his face when Theo revealed his identity. Crucially, it also captured Riley's implicit order to lie about what happened. "I'm sure I can find a witness who saw you take a swing at me." It was a clear conspiracy to file a false report. "It's an open and shut case," the city attorney said, rubbing his temples. "Riley is finished. We're looking at termination criminal charges for battery and attempting to coerce a false statement. Carter, he's a different story. He's culpable for not intervening sooner, but his footage corroborates the justice's entire account. He didn't participate in the lies." Harding nodded grimly. "Carter's already asked to give a full voluntary statement. Without a lawyer, he wants to come clean." The machinery of justice, once Theo had jump-started it, was now grinding forward with relentless, unstoppable force. For Officer Keegan Riley, that sound was the tolling of a bell. Keegan Riley sat in the drab beige office of his police union representative, a man named Don Kowalski. Kowalski was a bulldog known for getting cops out of tough spots, but as he reviewed the preliminary IAD report, his face was grim. "They've got everything, Keegan," Kowalski said, tossing the file on his desk. "The video, the audio. Your partner is rolling over on you. And the victim, for God's sake, man, a Supreme Court justice. What were you thinking?" "I wasn't thinking he looked like a bum." Riley protested, his voice high and strained. "How was I supposed to know it's entrapment?" Kowalski laughed, a short, bitter bark. "Entrapment? Do you even know what that word means? Did he ask you to break the law? Did he induce you to assault him? No, you did that all on your own. You walked into the most perfectly constructed career suicide in the history of this city." Riley's bravado was gone, replaced by a desperate, whining self-pity. "So what happens now? A suspension? I can take a suspension." "A suspension?" Kowalski leaned forward. "Keegan, listen to me. You're going to be fired. That is a certainty. The department is going to make a public spectacle of you to save face. And that's the good news. The DA's office is looking at the file. They're going to charge you. Battery official misconduct may be even a civil rights violation. You're not just losing your job. You're looking at prison time." The word prison sucked all the air out of the room. Riley stared at him, his face ashen. The world he had built, the authority, the respect, the power was not just collapsing. It was being vaporized. He thought of his mortgage, his car payments, the way his neighbors looked at him with admiration. It was all gone, wiped out in 20 minutes of thoughtless cruelty in a dark alley. Meanwhile, in a different part of the city, Officer Ben Carter was writing out his own future. He sat in an IAD interrogation room, a tape recorder running on the table, and told the truth. He didn't minimize his own role. "I should have stopped him," Carter said, his voice thick with shame. I knew it was wrong from the second we got out of the car. He gets like that. Officer Riley. He likes to push people to feel big. I was scared to stand up to him. Scared of what it would mean for my career. And because I was a coward, a man was assaulted. I failed my duty. It doesn't matter who that man was. I failed. He talked for 2 hours detailing not just the incident with Justice Monroe, but other similar encounters he had witnessed, times when Riley had bullied and intimidated people he deemed unworthy of respect. He was ending his own career in law enforcement. He knew that, but he was salvaging what was left of his integrity. Back at the Supreme Court, Theo found himself unable to concentrate on his work. The briefs on his desk seemed abstract, their legal arguments disconnected from the raw reality he had experienced. He kept seeing Riley's sneer, Carter's fear, and the bleeding scrape on his own palm. He walked to the window of his cavernous office, looking down at the steps of the court and the city beyond. His experiment had been a success in the worst possible way. He had wanted to feel the weight of the law, and he had. He'd felt the crushing weight of its absence and the terrifying weight of its misuse. This was never about revenge. Seeing Riley and Carter punished would bring him no joy. The true tragedy was the system that produced them. He thought of all the others, the ones who couldn't produce a magical ID card. Their stories didn't make the news. Their complaints were dismissed. Their assailants were never brought to justice. His clerk, a bright young woman named Sarah, knocked softly and entered. "So the chief of police is on the line for you again. He wants to update you on the investigation." Theo sighed. "Tell the chief I appreciate the update, Sarah. But tell him I am no longer the focus of this story. The focus should be on ensuring this never happens to anyone else. Ask him what he intends to do about that." He turned back to the window. His personal ordeal was ending, but he knew with a certainty that chilled him more than the December air that the larger fight for justice was a battle that was never ever won. It could only be fought day by day, case by case, and sometimes night by night in the cold, dark alleys of the world. 1 week later, the chief of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department stood at a podium facing a phalanx of cameras and reporters. The press conference was broadcast live on every major network. "The actions of former Officer Keegan Riley are a stain on this department and a betrayal of the oath we all swore to uphold." The chief announced, his voice ringing with rehearsed solemnity. "As of this morning, Mr. Riley has been terminated from the MPD. Furthermore, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia has filed criminal charges against him for assault and violation of civil rights under color of law." A murmur went through the crowd. This was swift, decisive action. "Officer Ben Carter," the chief continued, "has also been held accountable. He has been suspended without pay for 6 months. He has cooperated fully with this investigation, and his testimony was crucial. Upon his return to duty, he will be reassigned and will undergo extensive retraining. His future as a police officer will be subject to the strictest scrutiny." But the chief wasn't finished. He knew that punishing the 2 officers wasn't enough. The public and a certain justice demanded more. The incident with Justice Monroe has exposed a profound failing within our department, a failing of culture. To that end, I am announcing the immediate implementation of the Eleanor Project, a new mandatory training program for all officers focused on de-escalation, implicit bias, and empathetic community engagement, developed in partnership with civilian oversight committees. At his home, Theo watched the press conference on TV. He froze when he heard the name. The Eleanor Project. The chief had done his research. He had found a way to honor Theo's late wife and her life's work. It was a calculated political move, to be sure, but it was also a deeply meaningful one. A small, tearful smile touched Theo's lips for the first time in days. The fallout continued. Keegan Riley was convicted. The body cam footage was too powerful to overcome. He was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, a stunning fall for a man who had once wielded the power of the state. Ben Carter served his suspension. He spent those 6 months in deep reflection. He went to the public library and read books not about policing, but about sociology, history, and poverty. He started volunteering at a soup kitchen, the same one Eleanor Monroe had helped found years ago. He didn't talk much. He just washed dishes, served meals, and listened to the stories of the men and women he had once seen as nothing more than a nuisance. He was learning to see the person, not the label. 3 seasons passed. It was a warm autumn afternoon. Justice Theodore Monroe, dressed in a simple polo shirt and slacks, was walking near Judiciary Square. He no longer took his nocturnal pilgrimages. The point had been made with painful clarity. But he still walked the city, a quiet observer. He saw a familiar face at a coffee cart. It was Ben Carter in civilian clothes, grabbing a coffee before his volunteer shift. Their eyes met. For a moment, a flicker of panic crossed Carter's face, followed by a wave of shame. Theo simply nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement, not of forgiveness or condemnation, but of shared experience. Then he walked over to the cart. "I'll have a black coffee," he said to the vendor. Then he looked at Carter. "And get one for my friend here, too." Carter stared at him, stunned. "Sir, you don't have to do that." "I know," Theo said, handing the vendor a $10 bill. "Kindness, like cruelty, is a choice. We just have to decide which one to practice." He took his coffee and walked away, leaving Carter standing on the sidewalk, holding the warm cup in his hands. The justice hadn't offered absolution, but he had offered something more valuable, a moment of grace. It was a reminder that while the law could punish only, humanity could truly heal. And in the quiet light of a D.C. afternoon, the long, slow work of justice continued. 5 years is both a long time and no time at all. For Keegan Riley, it was an eternity spent in the sterile, monotonous world of a low-security federal prison and the subsequent struggle of a disgraced ex-convict trying to find his footing in a world that no longer wanted him. For Theodore Monroe, now retired from the bench, it was a quiet passage of seasons, filled with books, guest lectures at Georgetown Law, and peaceful afternoons tending the roses Eleanor had planted. For Ben Carter, it was a period of profound transformation. He had returned to the force, not with his head held low, but with a quiet, unshakable resolve. He'd passed the sergeant's exam with the highest score in his precinct, and had specifically requested to become a field training officer. He wanted to be the first point of contact for the rookies, the one who could shape their instincts before the cynicism of the streets hardened them into something they weren't. On a brisk October evening, 5 years after that fateful night, Sergeant Carter was in the passenger seat of a patrol car, observing his newest charge, a rookie named Dean Holloway. Holloway was young, sharp, and confident, perhaps a little too confident. He saw the world in black and white criminals and civilians, and he carried the weight of the badge on his shoulder like a piece of armor. Carter saw a faint, unsettling echo of a young Keegan Riley in him. A call came over the radio, a resident reporting a suspicious male loitering in the lobby of the Westminster, a luxury apartment building on the edge of Rock Creek Park. The description was painfully vague. Black man wearing a big, dirty-looking coat. "Sounds like our guy," Holloway said, hitting the accelerator. "Probably a package thief or casing the joint. Let's go shake him up." "Easy, Dean," Carter said, his voice calm and even. "Let's not go in with a narrative already written. We're going to observe and then we're going to talk. That's it. With all due respect, Sarge, Holloway countered, these guys only respect a show of force. You give them an inch, they'll walk all over you. Carter didn't reply. He just watched the city lights streak past the memory of a cold alley and the glint of a Supreme Court ID sharp in his mind. They arrived at the Westminster, its glass and steel lobby glowing warmly. Inside they saw the man. He was tall, thin, and was indeed wearing a large, worn-looking tweed overcoat. He was pacing slowly occasionally, glancing at the door, his face a mask of weary frustration. Holloway's hand went to his sidearm. See, he looks agitated. I'll take the lead. No, Carter said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He put a hand on Holloway's arm. You'll stay by the door and you'll watch me. You'll watch how the Eleanor Project works in the field. He left the rookie by the entrance and walked into the lobby. His posture relaxed, his hands visible and away from his belt. He didn't approach the man from behind or try to corner him. He walked into his line of sight and stopped a respectful 10 feet away. Evening, sir, Carter said, his voice conversational. Everything all right? We got a call. The man stopped pacing and looked at Carter. There was no hostility in his eyes, just exhaustion. Oh, hey, officer. Yeah, I'm fine, just profoundly stupid. He gestured at the electronic keypad on the door leading to the elevators. This is my building. I ran down to grab a package, and the lobby door locked behind me. Left my keys, my wallet, and my phone upstairs. My wife gets home in about 20 minutes, so I'm just stuck waiting. Holloway, watching from the door, shifted his weight, his expression a mixture of surprise and skepticism. Carter nodded, a small, empathetic smile on his face. That's the worst. Locks you out with nothing. I did that last month. Had to break into my own kitchen window. He extended a hand. I'm Sergeant Carter. And you are? Lawrence Bell, the man said, shaking his hand. Apartment 12B. Well, Mr. Bell, Carter said, I can appreciate you not wanting to break into your own building. Is there anything we can do to help? We could try to call your wife for you. No, it's all right, Lawrence said, his posture visibly relaxing. She's always on time. I really appreciate you asking, though. Thank you for being decent about this. The three men stood in a comfortable silence for a moment before the main door opened and a woman bustled in her arms full of groceries. Her face lit up. Lawrence, oh thank God, I was worried. She saw the officers and her smile faltered. Is everything okay? Everything is perfect, Lawrence said, taking the grocery bags from her. He looked at Carter and gave him a nod of pure, unadulterated gratitude. These officers were just making sure I was all right. Carter and Holloway left the couple and returned to the patrol car. As he started the engine, Holloway was quiet, staring out the windshield. He lived there, the rookie said almost to himself. He had a name, a wife. They always do, Dean, Carter replied softly. They're not descriptions from a 911 call. They're people. They have stories, jobs, bad days, just like us. He put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. A few years ago, I was part of a stop that went bad, terribly wrong. We treated a man like he was nothing because of how he was dressed. We saw a stereotype, not a person. It was the biggest mistake of my life, and it cost my partner everything. I learned that night that this uniform, this badge, it doesn't make you powerful. It makes you responsible. Our job isn't to shake people up. It's to see the humanity in them, especially when it's hardest to find. Powerless. Miles away in a quiet Georgetown home, Theodore Monroe sat in his favorite armchair reading the Sunday paper. An article on the front page of the Metro section caught his eye. It was a 5-year retrospective on the Eleanor Project, detailing its remarkable success in reducing citizen complaints and use-of-force incidents. It was now being used as a model for police departments across the country. He folded the paper and set it down, his gaze drifting to the framed photo of Eleanor on the mantelpiece. Her smile seemed to fill the room. He thought of the cold alley, the bitter insults, the weight of a man's boot on his soul. And he thought of a young officer who made a bad choice, and then a series of right ones. Justice, he mused, wasn't always a grand, sweeping judgment from a high bench. Sometimes it was as small and as quiet as a conversation in a lobby. Sometimes it was the ripple effect of a single night, changing the course of countless others long after the echo had faded. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace. The project, her project, was working. Her legacy was alive not just in memory, but in the streets of the city she had loved. The story of Justice Monroe is a shocking look at how easily power can be abused and how quickly the tables can turn. It's a stark reminder that the person we choose to dismiss could be someone of immense importance. But more than that, it forces us to ask a difficult question: why should that even matter? True justice shouldn't depend on a victim's status. It should be a shield for everyone, especially the most vulnerable among us. The story of Keegan Riley is a cautionary tale about ego and prejudice, while Ben Carter's journey shows that it is never too late to choose integrity over silence. If this story resonated with you and made you think about the real meaning of justice and respect, please help share it. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more powerful real-life stories, and share this video with someone you think needs to hear it. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. Thank you for listening.